presidencies. We're still getting people. Okay, it seems to have stopped. How do we know if people can hear us? I'm not sure. If you need sign language interpretation, we're now sharing the screen. I think it's loading, so it's a bit blurry at the moment. And if you need captioning, the link is in the chat box at the very top. So if you scroll all the way to the top, you'll find the link there. You can also access it by telephone. There's the number, I guess, somewhere that you will find. And yeah, we will be starting about 5 minutes, so just please hold. You'll hear more from Marie.
Slow network connection. How do I turn off my mic? Audio? No audio.
Sobre access. Hi again, everyone. If you have any technical difficulties, please let us know in the question box. We'll try to answer as quick as possible. Apologies for the delay and echoes. This webinar is being recorded and there will be a transcript available. Again, if you need sign language and interpretation and captioning, there are links. I'm reading apparently in a wrong order, so I'm going to start with this slide in front of me. So welcome, I just gave the housekeeping rules. Or that comes after, okay. Apologies, this is very messy. So there will be an introduction on the decision-making procedures on the EU level. Then there will be a bit of a talk on the work of the Council and its presidencies, including the differences on the different councils, so you don't get too confused. And we will have the good practice example of the Latvian Presidency of the EU presented by Gunta Anca. And then we will have questions and answers. If you have any questions, you can add them in the question box. And that's all that there was on that slide. Now the people here will be moderating. I'm Naomi, the communications assistant here at EDF. And we will have Marie Denninghaus, our policy coordinator, explaining how the council works and how it works at EU level, et cetera, et cetera. And Gunta Anca is our EDF secretary who will be talking about the Latvian presidencies and who will be answering any questions. So I guess I've already read the different housekeeping rules. But again, the webinar is being recorded and there will be a transcript. If you need alternative options, there are links in the chat box. There are question box for questions, and you can also access from a mobile device. Cool. So now we go to Marie, please.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So yeah, you saw we've set up now, so I hope everyone can hear us. Raquel is still, I think, solving some technical issues. I will start with a short introduction about the decision-making procedures on EU level, because if we talk about the council, first of all is the question, what council are we talking about? Some of you may have already followed our trainings on the EU institutions, so for you this will be a short recap, but for the others I think this might be quite useful to put this in the context. So first of all, we have the structure of the EU institutions. quite a simplified version of this, as you can see on the screen, is this triangle shape. At the bottom, you have the European Commission, the European Parliament, and today I put on top the Council. Also, I put it on top. I will explain that also in later slides, because in my opinion, the Council is in some respects the most important institution, because it can really influence a decision maker. It has the last word, so to say. Also, what is important to know in this case, the Council, remember, it is the member states. It's a bit of a complicated institution because it is both an EU institution and it is the national governments. So this is also good to remember when I'm explaining to you later what the role of the Council is and the Council presidencies. On the left-hand side of this slide, I have listed other institutions and bodies. They include, for example, the Court of Justice, the European Central Bank, the European Economic and Social Committee. These are, of course, also relevant, but today I will not mention them. These are, let's say, lesser important bodies. And if you would like, you can inform yourself about these another stage. So what I already mentioned before, Council, Council, and Council. What Council are we actually talking about? I know this is quite confusing, but what we are talking about today, and this is why I highlighted it in bold on top, is the Council of the EU. And what this is, it helps me sometimes to remember that it used to be known as Council of Ministers. And that means that it's the different policy configurations. So usually the ministers for the different files are meeting. And this could be the ministers of finance are meeting in the Finance Council, the ministers of transport are meeting in the Transport Council, etc. So it's not, and this is the second council that I listed here, the heads of state and governments. So when Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron, etc., and they are meeting, for example, tomorrow on the summit on the budget, which is a very big and high-level summit, this is more of extraordinary meetings that happen as well in Brussels, but these are just the heads of state and government. They take very high-level political decisions. They do not go much into detail of different policies. So this is the difference. And we will talk more about this Council of Ministers, which is the representations of the different policy levels. Usually this happens after a schedule that is, I think, they meet per presidency, I think maybe 4 times, depending on the subjects. And lastly, last but not least, what adds to the confusion is an institution which has a similar name, but has actually nothing to do with the EU, and that is the Council of Europe. I put it very small here in the slides, so this is not good for accessibility, but I did it on purpose. So actually you should forget this straight away again. Do not even remember the Council of Europe in this presentation. It's completely irrelevant. It's not an EU institution. It is an international organization based in Strasbourg, but it has members also from outside the EU, for example, Ukraine, etc. So this is at the moment completely irrelevant. So the Council of the EU, as I mentioned, what we're talking about today, is in some considerations the most powerful institution, as I said, because in the decision-making procedure, they have the last word. Of course, it is all a negotiation and compromise between the different institutions, but if the Council does not adopt a position or does not agree, a legislative file, a proposal can be stuck basically forever. We have this example, you may all be aware of the proposal of the Horizontal Equal Treatment Directive, which was very important for us as a disability movement. It was proposed and by the Commission, the Parliament put their position out there, but actually the Council completely stopped it and it has been frozen now for 10 years. So just to illustrate the kind of power that the Council has. And even within the Council, some member states have also more power than others. Normally, every member state has 1 vote. But in practice, you can imagine that bigger member states also have more influence on some files. Unfortunately, the Council is also the least transparent institution, at least for us to work with. That means that meetings are behind closed doors. There are no recordings, no minutes, nothing that is public, apart from maybe a summary or an agenda. So it makes it quite difficult for us to engage with. But that is also why we're having this training today, this webinar, to see in what levels we can engage. So even though this sounds negative, I want you to think positive and see what we actually can do with the Council. Again, just to remind you, the Council is not some faraway EU institution. It is actually your national governments and your national ministries. So remember that actually the Council is more approachable sometimes from a national level than it is from Brussels. And what's also very useful to know is that for the Council, we have this rotating presidency. So every 6 months, a different member state takes the lead. I will explain in another slide in more detail how that works and why this is important. Finally, what we usually understand as the Council is the permanent representations of the member states. So they have a kind of an office in Brussels, like EDF has a secretariat in Brussels. They have their representation in Brussels, and there they have an ambassador. And usually these ambassadors and his or her staff attend the regular meetings, which are not the high-level meetings, like the meetings of the heads of state of government or the ministers. So this is a little bit like their delegation, so to say, in Brussels. And as I said, a quick recap of the decision-making procedure. I don't want to scare you. I'm just showing this slide with a very complicated graph with a lot of different institutions and arrows going back and forth. This is actually the decision-making procedure as it is described officially. But I'm gonna quickly skip this and show you a very simplified version, which again, maybe illustrates also why the Council has such an influence and is so important. Because you can see now in my very simplified graph, there are 3 institutions on top. So the Commission, the Parliament, and the Council. And it starts with the Commission putting out a proposal, which of course is also a very powerful position because they can decide already what is in the proposed text. But from the Commission, it usually goes to the European Parliament, and the Parliament will define their position in return. So they will say, we like this part of the Commission proposal, but we do not like that part. We propose a different Article 2. We propose to add a reference to the CRPD in the recitals. So the Parliament can make proposals for changes. And then it goes to the Council. In theory, actually, it could go directly to the Council, but in practice, with many files, it actually first goes to the Parliament, and the Council is sometimes the last institution that actually defines their position, which gives them already a little bit the advantage that they can first see the other ones and then kind of add their own position in the end. Also, just for your information, in the EU speak, the Council position is called a general approach. So if you ever read this, then you will maybe remember that this is just another word for the Council's policy position. And then, and this is why I say it's very simplified, because this is not how it is actually written in the books. Once these 3 institutions have defined their positions, it goes into what we call trialogues. And trialogues is because there are 3 institutions, so three, and they negotiate informally. I'm adding this because actually 85% of all the laws are adopted following trialogues. So even though this is not an official procedure at all, it is not mentioned anywhere in the treaties, it is not official, since 85% of all laws are adopted this way, I think it's fair to say we can simplify and say this is the most common procedure. So in these trialogue negotiations, the 3 institutions sit together and they bargain, you could say. They try to find a common position. And so what we have in the end, when the trialogue is successful, is a compromise agreement. Again, as I said before, the Council has the advantage that they can technically block an agreement. And in many cases, it happens that the Commission is quite keen on getting the position adopted, obviously, because they made the proposal. They don't want to make too many changes. The same is with the Parliament. And then we have to see what comes out in the end. So just to sum up, what should you remember from this first part of the presentation? The Council is not a very abstract, faraway institution. It is actually the member states. So it is your ministries, it is your head of state or government. So remember that actually is it's an interesting fact. Forget the Council of Europe, don't even think about it. And the Council usually has the last word. The second part of my introduction is more now about actually the work of the Council and the presidencies and why they are important for us, why we should remember them. And as I mentioned before, a kind of special case in the Council is that we have a rotating presidency. And I also maybe want to explain what is then the role of the President of the European Council if there is a rotating presidency and a permanent president, which at the moment is Charles Michel from Belgium. So the presidency rotates every 6 months, and this was originally done, I think, to give all member states a fair shot at having a little bit their agenda or deciding on the agenda. It was maybe easier when there were fewer member states, but now actually it becomes more and more complicated to keep some kind of coherence, because 6 months is not very long if you think about how long it takes to adopt some legislation, which can be 3-4 years. So 6 months is a very short time in Brussels terms and decision-making terms. So what was decided since the Lisbon Treaty, so since 2009, was that there should always be 3 presidencies working stronger together to set up a long-term political vision, so that not after 6 months a proposal is dropped or falls off the agenda because another presidency sets completely different priorities. And this has made it a little bit more efficient than before. Also, what the role of the presidency is, so now, for example, Croatia has the presidency. That means that every meeting in the Council, even if it is on technical level, so if the Social Questions Working Party meets, the Croatian attaché will be chairing the meeting. They will be setting the agenda, writing the minutes, the internal minutes that we don't get to see, obviously. So this is the role of the presidency. So they should, in theory, be a neutral broker, which, as you can imagine, can be difficult, because if you have your own political positions and say until one day before the presidency starts, you are still there as Croatia and you have your own interests, and suddenly on the next day you start the presidency, you have to be completely neutral. You can imagine this is maybe a bit tricky, but I think it's good, because like this you get different viewpoints as well. Finally, to explain, so what is now the role of Charles Michel? He was this position of the President of the European Council, so the part which assembles the head of state and government, was introduced to provide a bit more of a face to the institution. I think it was the perception that the Council is even harder to access than other institutions. So it was decided to give also more continuity over this 5-year term. So I think this is very roughly, I think, what the presidency is. I'm now going to explain a little bit more what the tasks are, apart from chairing the meetings. So just to give you an idea, that per presidency, there can be 200 to 300 legislative files. So there can be the Accessibility Act, the Equal Treatment Directive, and this times basically 200. So you have really like a lot of different files. And that means that per presidency, and this is an average number I found online, let's hope it's correct, there are about 1,500 formal and informal meetings and events. This includes also the high-level meetings. This includes all the working party meetings, but also other informal events, which can be, for example, cultural events to promote the presidency, etc. But I think Gunta will also explain later more about the events that and meetings that can happen in the presidency. The council, the presidency also represents the council in relations with other EU institutions. So when the Commission and the Parliament are meeting, it's really the Croatians that represent the Council in this case. And then obviously they support the work and of other EU institutions, like if you have like the High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, for example, they support the work. Now, just to give you a quick reminder, most of you will more or less know, so the current presidency is Croatia, and the following presidencies will be Germany, Portugal, Slovenia, and France. This is until 2020, and Czech Republic, 2022, sorry, and the Czech Republic, and then we have Sweden, which is only in 2023. I put it already, so to see that you actually have to already be planning in advance at least, I would say, 2 years in order to really make sure you get the most out of the presidencies. So this is a really short breakdown of the advice. As I said, if you want to work with the presidencies, if you want to approach them and make the most out of it, to really make sure they include disability in their programs, they have a high-level event on disability, they pick up the legislative files that are important to you. For example, if you want them to pick up the Equal Treatment Directive again, it's really start early. So planning 2021-22 is now already in full swing. So really make sure, because this is really a long-term plan. And then, of course, as I said before, use your national contacts, because often from Brussels, we have less of an influence than you would have if you know, for example, who works on the files in the Ministry of Social Affairs. Already try to contact them informally even, because they are starting to set the agendas as well. But Gunta will also, I think, include some of these tips later. Be proactive. I think this is also good, because you can suggest things. It's not that everything is decided beforehand, but often, of course, lobbying helps. And finally, to look how you can get concrete outcomes. Something that you can get, for example, from a presidency is what they call council conclusions, which is a kind of recommendation that the council gives at the end, which is an official document and which can help you to then, for example, go back to your national government, or even go back to the commission and say, the council, for example, proposes to have a new legislation on accessibility. And so this is a way to put pressure on other institutions. And finally, as I mentioned above, meet with the relevant national actors and just make your agenda heard. Here are just some useful websites with general information. I know I gave you quite a lot now to think about, but you have also the presentation in the handout section of the webinar, and it will be circulated later. So feel free to just click through the links and see. You can check the document register of the council and look at the status of different decision-making procedures, etc. This was my part of the presentation. I hand back to Naomi.
All right, well, thank you very much. Yeah, we just want to make sure that we communicate that, of course, while the Council of Europe is an important entity, we don't want to bombard you with too much information in one presentation. So just wanted to make that point. Okay, so now we're going to go to Gunta for a good practice example of the Latvian presidency in 2015. Gunta, can you hear us?
Hello, do you hear me now?
Hi, Gunta. Yes, we can hear you. Perfect.
That's great, perfect.
All right, so could you please give us a small introduction, and then this presentation doesn't have a slideshow, so we will be going on a question and answer basis. So yes, please give us an introduction.
Okay, my name is Gunta and I'm Secretary of European Disability Forum. At the same time, I'm a chairperson of the Latvian umbrella body for organizations of people with disabilities. So I'm working really hard on a national level, and I know exactly how it works. Okay. Can you hear me? Is everything okay?
Is it possible to put your microphone a bit louder?
I don't think so, but I can try to speak louder.
Yeah, okay.
Is it better now?
Can you hear me properly? No. Okay. We can get just 2 minutes to try to fix this little issue.
Okay, okay.
What do we do?
Could you move up there and just speak?
Sorry. Okay.
That's okay, just go ahead.
All right. Okay. Should we start? Should I ask?
Now, is it better?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, we
better
can
now.
hear you. We're
Okay, it's great.
okay. So did you want to
Okay.
continue? Do you want to see some questions?
Yeah, so maybe you can continue by questions, and then we'll see how it works.
Okay, perfect. So we wanted to know a bit more about how you prepared for the presidency and how disability was included in the presidency of the program, and what events and meetings maybe you managed to organize as part of it.
Okay, so let's start by idea what Mario already said. That it is very, very important to start your preparation at least 2 years before the presidency, because it's important to understand exactly how you can manage to have a disability issues in your presidency. To be honest, we've seen that there are two different kind of events. There could be events which are directly connected with disability issues, and the other part could be those events where people are talking about different issues, but disability is mainstreamed about in the event. And maybe I can tell you a little bit more about those events we had in Latvia. For example, in Latvia, we had 3 big events. And those 3 big events were high-level meeting on disability, which was in Riga in May. Then we had one more big event about disaster management for people with disabilities. And one more big event was about the institutionalization, which is also very important for our country and on that moment, and for European Union on that moment. So we were very happy to have them there. Those are 3 biggest events. And then we have quite a lot of smaller events we used to talk about during our presidency. And those small events were a very different one, like, for example, about employment in general, but we speak about people with disabilities too. Then, for example, about gender equality, and then we spoken about women with disabilities there. Then we had event on healthcare for chronic patients, and then we spoke about chronic patients and disabilities. So we try to mainstream all those kinds of issues there, and I think it was a very good approach how we can do that. Is it okay? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. There's also a lot of background sound. We're struggling a little bit, but we did hear you. So we'll ask you more questions. Did you feel you could proactively in the presidency program and the agenda, and what were the difficulties that you were facing?
Of course, we are doing it very proactive. Nobody came to us and said, of course, you have to do that, but we are doing proactive. And we started we started with office of presidency. You know, we have the Secretariat of the Latvian Presidency of Council and European Union. And this secretariat was the one which was the most involved in all activities. We started with that office, but we also started very practically by going to each ministry and by trying to find the issues which are responsibilities of that ministry. And of course, it was much more easier when you go, for example, to Ministry of Social Affairs. So you can talk about employment and about different kind of supports, but even when you go to the Ministry of Economic, you can talk about entrepreneurship for people with disabilities. Then you can go to Ministry of Transport and talk about passenger rights for people with disabilities. And then you can go to the Ministry of, I don't know, Health and talk about healthcare opportunities for people with disabilities. And all of them are very important.
Hello. Hello.
Oh,
So something like that.
okay. Thank you. Sorry, it was a bit confusing hearing the voices in the background. Another question. Did you think it was worth investing in the presidency in terms of long-term legacy?
Could you repeat your question? It was difficult to hear.
Did you think it was worth investing in the presidency in terms of long-term legacy?
I think it was a very important part for our work because it gives us possibility to be much more visible and to show the European things in Latvia. It was also very important to have involvement of European Union in Latvia. For example, I've prepared opinion in European Economic and Social Committee about the institutionalization, and the event was part of the possibility to present this opinion in Riga, which is very important for us.
Okay, thank you. And do you have any advice for other DPOs?
About advices for DPOs, it's very important to start as early as possible. It's very important to talk with your presidency office and to talk about very practical things. Like, for example, not only about the issues you could talk about, but also about the way how the transportation will be organized, how accessible your meetings will be, how you can organize accessible places for accommodation, because you never know what kind of delegates will come from different countries. And those practical issues are also very important. Also, we involved quite a lot of volunteers, and they helped us with the different issues, like to find accessible eating places or to help people during the event. So, and it's also very important to have some kind of training for these volunteers and also for staff of the presidency office, because they shouldn't understand that there is not only people on a wheelchair, they could be a different kind of disabilities like a blind or deaf people, and we should take them into account when we're organizing presidency meetings.
Okay, thank you. And one more question. Were you able to get funding from the relevant ministries?
Yes, we were able to get a funding. So we get a funding for those 3 bigger events, which is very great. And also the possibility to get this mainstream involvement of disability issues give us possibility to talk about disabilities without additional funding for those events, because those events were already organized by somebody get a funding, and our task was just to say, oh, that's a great issue, and we would like to talk about disabilities there too.
Okay. Yes. Is there anything you would like to add that I may not have asked?
No, in general, not yet.
All right, then I think we can wrap it up then for the presentation. Thank you. Don't see any further questions. So if you have any, make yourselves known. You can post the questions in the question box. Yeah. Of course. Okay, so we're going to refer back to a bit before about the Council of Europe. Marie, if you want to take that one.
Yeah, so we already received a question, or it was more of a comment, actually saying that the Council of Europe is actually an important organization, and maybe I wasn't clear enough in my presentation. Of course, it is a very important organization. I really didn't want to minimalize it. I just really tried to highlight that in this presentation, we kind of have to leave it out of the context, because I think it's very confusing in the more different councils you have. So I can maybe just give you some bit of context or background information that the person mentioned also about the Council of Europe. So it is an intergovernmental human rights body. It exists since 1949, and it is connected to the EU in some ways. That is true. It is not an EU institution, but obviously it also takes up important issues that we also discuss in the EU framework. So this maybe just to give you some background, we absolutely did not want to minimize the role of the Council of Europe. So just to clarify this. Any more questions?
Okay, so we got one more question. This one, I guess, is for, this is for both Gunta and Marie. France will have the presidency in 2 years, in 2022. What can be done now in France to prepare for the presidency? First, Gunta, if you can. Gunta, can you hear us?
Yeah, maybe it's a good idea if you have a presidency in 2 years, as I can see, you can find out where is your office of presidency in France, and to start your conversation with them to find out what kind of ideas they have already, or do they have any ideas, and to explain how important disability issues are and how important it is to include in a presidency. And when you get the ideas of the France presidency already, what do they have in their pocket, then you can try to explain more how you would be happy to be involved. So maybe it works.
Okay, maybe I can also add, thanks Gunta, in terms of organization, the EDF Secretariat can of course also support you. This is one of the roles that we have. So of course your national organization in France and the member of EDF, which is CFHE, they will take the lead role, but we can support you in a sense that we coordinate a little bit the work towards the council and the presidencies. So I can explain to you what we do already is that we have at our board meetings, we meet regularly with the members that have upcoming presidencies to discuss informally what are the priorities that you see from national level, and then we can combine this with priorities that we see on EU level. What we do then is that we draft a paper with disability priorities for the presidency, which then you can use obviously when communicating with the presidency office, with the different ministries and with your contacts, and that we can use on EU level. And we are also helping you to organize high-level meetings, for example, with the ambassador, so the permanent representative here in Brussels, so that when you come to Brussels, we have the meeting also to brief the staff of the permanent representation, to, as Gunta mentioned, for example, to give training. I think this is something also quite important, that you can then prepare, and to also, in some cases, the permanent representation staff, they're not experts on disability. Yeah, this is also very important to know. So it's really good to first put disability on the agenda. And as I said, the EDF Secretariat here, we are also there to support you.
Super. All right. So we got another question. This one is, what were the disability priorities proposed by EDF to Croatia?
Oh, I hope I will remember. I'm taking this question, Gunta, if you don't mind, because I drafted the paper. I have to try and remember. So we oriented it along the general lines of what policy issues are relevant at the moment. So we, for example, put the budget. Now are still the negotiations about the EU budget to make sure that there will be money for DPOs in the budget, and also that accessibility, for example, is included in the structural funds regulations, that there will be no EU money spent, for example, on new institutions. That is the part on the budget. Then another priority under the Croatian presidency is at the moment the revision of the rail passengers' rights regulation. So that is also high on the agenda. And then I know that from the national level, there was also a request to include disability assessment. That was something which was brought in, and we will have actually a conference in May in Zagreb on exactly this topic, on disability assessment, and also on the financing of DPOs. I think this is also quite relevant. So we have really a mixture. I think all the relevant topics that are on the agenda at the moment are, of course, related also to the implementation of the CRPD, but this is now just to mention a couple of concrete policy files. We have the document, of course, so I mean, we can also distribute it. I think it's even on our website already. It should be uploaded. So normally you should find it on our website, edf-feph.org.
Thank you, Marie. Any more questions? Okay, I don't think there will be any more questions. So this will all be recorded and available online. We will also have an accessible transcript. So yes, if you have any more questions, you can contact us. Contact the people that you heard today from Marie Denninghaus and Gunta Anca. And that is all for today. Thank you also to our interpreters and to the live captioners, and also apologies for all the technical difficulties, including our whispers. There are 3 computers in front of us. It is difficult to handle all of them at the same time, but we hope that you found this useful, and that you have a lovely day. Thank you.